So I know it has been an absolutely very long time since I have read Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. Doing my mystery box that my parents made for me. I had stopped reading because as I was doing this, I got a lot more interest for some of the other books that I was reading from my subscribers. But there has been a request from a couple people for this book to be continued along with the mystery box reveal. So as you can see, as a refresher, I decided to put on everything: the red lipstick, the earrings, the necklace, the gloves, this was the last item we got in the reveal, the watch. So it's supposed to represent the anatomically correct heart clock that was on, I think it was page 49 or so. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Of course, this is not an anatomically correct clock, but my parents were amazing to be able to find a clock like that, so I'm wearing it all. Of course, one of my first gifts was this little box, which I'm using to hold everything. There's the lipstick and the quote that I believe it was Emily Shaw. So special shout out to her. She was able to explain to me the quote, which was fantastic. If I got that wrong, please correct me, because I believe that was Emily. So thank you for that. As well as this beautiful letter opener that kind of represents the dagger in her hands for the book. So like I said, it has been a while, so I might be a little rusty while reading. Please forgive me. But I'm gonna start reading this again, and hopefully more interest will grow with it. And if not, the subscribers who have asked for it, I will definitely keep reading for. Plus, I am also excited to kind of get through the rest of the book box, which is down here. We have a couple more items. I'm very excited. We will get to one today on page 71. So my goal for this video is we were going to... Oops. I dropped that, but that's okay. I can pick that up later. Oops, I lost the page. So, we finished, let's see, because I lost the page. Sorry about that. So yeah, we finished chapter 5. So we will be picking up on chapter 6 for Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco, chapter 6, and on page 71 will be our next opening, and then we will finish, that's in chapter 7, and then we will finish chapter 7, and that will conclude this video. It may be pretty short, but I just kind of want to get us kind of back into the waters. So, and then we'll definitely go forward. I'll do videos as often as I can, and there should not be as many delays as there were. The reason there were delays is, like I said, I didn't think anybody was interested in this, so I was kind of holding off for a little while before completing it. And then also I was getting married, and I had my honeymoon, and all that was successful. I had a great time, and I'm now a wife, so that's amazing. And that took some time away. But without further ado, I'm going to read. Oh dear, this is interesting. I haven't worn the watch before. So, Chapter 6, Den of Sin. Dr. Jonathan Wadsworth's Parlor, Highgate, 8 September, 1888. Nathaniel was pale as a corpse when I rushed into Uncle's stuffy parlor. The dark greens and blue swirls of the wallpaper were meant to inspire a sense of tranquility, but did little to calm my brother. Sweat trickled down his brow, staining a ring around the starched collar of his shirt. His hair was as wild as his eyes. Severe dark circles marred his normally flawless complexion. My brother hadn't slept all night, it seemed, but the sorry state of his hair worried me the most. I gathered my skirts and collided with him halfway across the room, ignoring the way the boning on my corset dug painfully into my ribs. He wrapped me into an uncomfortably tight embrace, tucking his chin into my neck and breathing deeply. "You're all right," he whispered, half mad. "Thank the heavens you're all right." I pulled back slightly, peering into his eyes. "Of course I am, Nathaniel. Why would you assume I wasn't?" "Forgive me, sister. I just learned of the second murder and where it occurred. I knew the victim wasn't you, but couldn't shake the sense of foreboding gripping my heart." He swallowed hard. "Imagine my worry. You haven't the best history when it comes to sound judgment. I feared you'd been lured away someplace dreadful. The day has already been unkind to our family. I couldn't help fearing the worst." "Why wouldn't you think of finding me here sooner?" I asked, clutching the last unraveling thread of my patience. How infuriating having to deal with such doubt all the time. If I were a man, Nathaniel certainly wouldn't be treating me as if I were incapable of looking after myself. "You know, I spend most of my time with Uncle. Surely you can't have been running aimlessly around the streets all afternoon. And what has the day done to our family that's so horrid?" Nathaniel's features twisted with anger. "Why indeed would I be flustered? Perhaps because my sister cannot bother to remain indoors like a normal, decent girl." At first his words stole the breath from me. Why must I either be docile and decent or curious and wretched? I was a decent girl, even if I spent my spare time reading about science theories and dissecting the dead. I drew myself up, sticking my finger in his chest. Why in heaven's name would I leave a note Father could find? You know how he'd react to discovering my lies. Have you gone completely mad, or is this just a temporary spell of insanity? I didn't allow him a moment to respond. Thank goodness it seems to affect Wadsworth's born of only the superior gender. My lowly womanhood shall save me from you brutes yet. Now what is this nonsense about the day? Has it anything to do with Father? The fight drained from my brother as swiftly as it had come. He stepped back, rubbing the tension from his temples. I don't know where to begin. Suddenly the floor was vastly intriguing to him. He stared at it, refusing to meet my eyes. Father will be away for a few weeks. Is he all right? I touched his elbow. Nathaniel, please, look at me. Nathaniel stood straighter, meeting my worried gaze. A superintendent called on our house this morning. Now, Audrey Rose, what I'm about to tell you is quite disturbing. Steady yourself. I rolled my eyes. I assure you I'm more than capable of hearing whatever you've come to say, brother. The only thing that might kill me is the unwarranted suspense. Someone snorted from the doorway, and Nathaniel and I both snapped our attention to the unwelcome intruder, Thomas. He covered his mouth but didn't bother hiding the fact he was shaking with laughter. Do go on, he managed between bouts of chuckling. Pretend I'm not here if you must. This ought to be good. Must you intrude on other people's conversations? I said, sounding snappish even to my own ears. Have you nothing better to do? Or do you simply excel at being arrogant and unlikable in every manner? Thomas's smile didn't falter, but there was a noticeable shift as amusement left his eyes. I wished to crawl into the nearest grave and hide. Thomas, I do apologize. That was... Your uncle asked that I check on the racket coming from this room. He wanted to make sure you weren't murdering each other on his favorite oceanic carpet. Thomas paused, adjusting his cuffs, his tone now cold and remote as the Arctic tundra. I assure you, young miss, I'd rather have my nails ripped from their beds one by one this very moment than remain here unwanted a breath longer. His attention flickered to Nathaniel. Tell her about your father's dance with Scotland Yard this morning. I promise you she's most equipped to handle it. Without another word, Thomas inclined his head, then stalked from the room. It was clear I'd heard him, but I hadn't the time to dwell on it. I swung around, facing Nathaniel. What does this have to do with Father? My brother walked on to the settee and sat. Apparently, some time after breakfast, Father went into Whitechapel. Detective inspectors were scouring the neighborhood, what with the murders and all, and found him in a certain establishment, unbefitting to his title. Nathaniel swallowed. He's lucky the man who discovered him knew who he was. The superintendent escorted Father home, suggesting he'd leave the city for a few weeks, or at least until he gets his affairs in order. I closed my eyes, my imagination running away with astounding leaps. There were only a few different establishments in the East End, pubs, brothels, and opium dens. Somehow, I found myself collapsing onto the little couch next to Nathaniel. Father took laudanum, an opium tincture, every day since Mother's death. The doctor assured us it would cure him of his insomnia and other ailments, but it appeared to be having the opposite effect. Images of him mopping his brow, walking the halls at night, and his growing paranoia flashed through my mind. I couldn't believe I hadn't associated Father's souring moods and behavior with the abuse of his precious tonic. I picked at stray threads on my skirts. How was Father? To be quite honest, he wasn't in any condition to discuss anything when I left, Nathaniel said, shifting uncomfortably. The superintendent is taking Father to the cottage in my stead. I nodded. Our cottage was a sprawling country estate in Bath named Thornbriar. It was beautiful and extravagant, like most things Lord Wadsworth had inherited. It was the perfect place to recover one's sensibility. He's been very discreet and helpful, the superintendent, Nathaniel added. I clamped my mouth shut. Father probably paid this policeman for his silence in the past, and his kindness was a result of hoping for more monetary gain. Is there anything you need me to do? Nathaniel shook his head. Superintendent Blackburn, I believe his name is, was getting Father's things together with the new valet, and said I should focus on finding you. They set off about an hour ago. I keep moving my lips because I don't wear lipstick, and I feel it, so I'm kind of like hoping I don't have it all in my teeth, so if I do, sorry, but whatever. Anyway, sorry about that. Moving on. I stared at my brother for a beat. Father had already left. No matter how hard he made life at home, I couldn't stop myself from worrying after him. I took a deep breath. Dwelling on things out of my control when there were murders to solve and bodies to be studied was a luxury I could ill afford. Will you be all right without me for a little while? I asked, standing and brushing down the front of my bodice. I really must get back to assisting Uncle if there's nothing to be done at home. Nathaniel's focus drifted toward the door leading to the laboratory. God only knew what was running through his mind. According to my brother, Uncle was one case away from crossing into the darkness he so loved studying. Instead of instigating another argument, I clutched his hands in mine and smiled. He softened a bit, and my smile grew. Aunt Amelia's lessons on how to persuade the opposite gender came in handy after all. I'd need to attempt even better tactics with Thomas if I hoped to repair his bruised feelings. I'll be home in time for a late dinner. We can discuss a treatment plan for Father then. I stood back, letting a bit of humor creep into my voice. Besides, you really should address the matter of your hair, brother. You're a wreck. Nathaniel looked torn between laughing, demanding I return home with him, and allowing me the freedom he knew I so strongly desired. Finally, his shoulders slumped. I shall send the carriage back at precisely 7 o'clock. No arguments. While Father's gone, I'm in charge, until Aunt Amelia arrives, that is. Despite everything going on, this was rather pleasant news. I could handle Aunt Amelia and all her etiquette lessons. Her mornings were filled with visits to the shops, afternoons with teas and gossip, and she retired early enough, claiming her need of beauty rest, but I knew she truly enjoyed a few spirits before bed. She'd be coming and going more than I was. Freedom would be a blissful thing. Somehow, in the midst of Father's addiction, a career-murdered, mutilated woman, and buckets of blood, I managed a small smile. You're pleased your father will be gone? Thomas wasn't asking, merely telling me how I felt with more confidence than anyone had the right to possess. Ignoring him, I scanned the notes my uncle had scratched down at each crime scene. Something had to stand out. If I could find that one connection before Uncle returned from Scotland Yard. You've had quite a poor relationship with him, probably for a few years. He paused, dropping his attention to where I twisted my mother's ring. It was a pear-shaped diamond, her birthstone, and one of the few possessions of hers Father actually allowed me to keep, or I should say one of the few items he could part with. Father had a sentimental heart. Growing up, I'd always wished my birthday was in April, too. Diamonds were everything I hoped to be, beautiful, yet containing unimaginable strength. Somehow I was more of a Herkimer diamond, similar in appearance to the real thing, but not quite authentic. A sad smile tugged at Thomas's mouth. Ah, I see. You haven't been on good terms since the death of your mother. His smile faded, his voice growing quiet. Tell me, was it difficult for you? Did he beg your uncle to fix her with science? I stood so abruptly my chair fell to the ground with a clatter that would awaken the dead, had there been any in the laboratory. Do not speak about things you know nothing of. I balled my fist to keep them from thrashing out at him. His mask of indifference fell away, revealing honest regret. After a few breaths, I calmly asked, "How did you come to know these intimate details of my life? Have you been asking my uncle about it, purposely, to hurt me?" "It seems you must realize how much." Thomas shook his head. "Hurting you wasn't my intent. I apologize, Miss Wadsworth. I thought perhaps I could—" Did I skip a page or something? Oh, it's skipped. So, there we go. We're talking to Thomas, not the brother. Got it. So after reading, somehow in the midst of father's addiction, a career, blah, blah, I managed a small smile. It skipped to, "You're pleased your father will be gone. Thomas wasn't asking." Blah, 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 blah. So that was not her brother, it was Thomas. My bad. I read that, but for some reason it didn't click in my head that we had a switch. Sorry, guys. Okay, anyway, I'm back on track. Moving on. You must realize how much." Thomas shook his head. "Hurting you wasn't my intent. I apologize, Miss Wadsworth. I thought perhaps I could—" He shrugged and fell silent, leaving me to wonder what he thought he could do by bringing up such a terrible subject. I inhaled deeply, curiosity getting the better of my anger. "All right. I'll forgive you this once." I raised a finger at the look of hope blossoming in his features. "Only if you tell me truthfully how you knew that." "I believe I can manage that. It was quite easy." He pulled his chair around the table, towing the line of what polite society deemed decent. "You simply need to hone your powers of deduction, Wadsworth. Look at the obvious and go from there. Most people ignore what's right before their eyes. They believe they see, but oftentimes only view what they want, which is precisely how you missed your father's opium addiction for so long." He patted the front of his jacket and pants pocket, knitting his brow when his search returned no results. "It boils down to mathematical equations and formulas. If the evidence is E and the question is Q, then what equals A to get to your answer? Simply look at what's before you and add it up." I drew my brows together. "You're saying you figured all that out by simply watching me? Excuse me if I find that extremely hard to believe. You can't apply mathematical formulas to people, Cresswell. There's no equation for human emotion. There are too many variables." "True. I've no formula I can work out for certain emotions I feel around you." That lively spark was back in his countenance. Leaning away, he folded his arms across his chest and grinned at my deep blush. "However, upstairs, when your brother said your father would be gone, you smiled, then immediately frowned, causing one to believe you were covering up your elation at being left alone for a few weeks. You didn't want to seem an insensitive monster, especially since your poor father is unwell." "How did you see that?" I asked, eyes narrowed. "You'd already left the room." Thomas didn't reveal the answer to that question, but a flicker of amusement was there and gone, so I knew he'd heard me, spying scoundrel. "Now, when I mentioned your poor relationship," he continued, "your eyes darted to that ring you were absently turning around your finger. Judging from the style and fit, I deduced it was not originally your ring." He paused again, rechecking his suit pockets. I hadn't the faintest idea what he was looking for, but his agitation was growing. He shook his hands out. "Whose ring was it, one might ask? Considering the somewhat old-fashioned style, it's not hard to believe it belonged to someone old enough to be your mother," he said. "Since you sneak about in the late-night hours and spend time in this laboratory coming to the conclusion your mother is no longer living and your father doesn't know your whereabouts wasn't hard." Thomas bit his lip, seeming lost for how to continue. Now I understood the way his mind worked. Cool detachment was a switch he flipped while working out problems. I braced myself for something unpleasant and waved him on. "Go on. Out with it." He studied my face, gauging my sincerity. What kind of father doesn't know where his daughter is? One who doesn't have the best relationship with said daughter because he's likely too consumed by his own grief or addiction to really care. Thomas sat forward, intrigue and possibly even esteem lighting his gaze. "How might a young woman such as yourself become obsessed with the macrame?" By bearing witness to a scientific act of desperation meant to save a life. Where would you come into contact with that, I wonder? He purposefully glanced around the room, driving his point home. "See? All the answers I sought were plainly visible. I didn't know until now your uncle was involved with your mother's." He trailed off, realizing he was straying close to a sensitive subject. "Anyway, You simply need to know where to look for the questions. An easy mathematical formula applied to Homo sapiens. And behold, science reigns over nature once more, no emotions needed. Except you're wrong, I whispered, shaken by the level of his accuracy. Without humans and nature, there's no such thing as science. That's not exactly what I mean, Wadsworth. What I'm talking about is trying to solve a riddle or crime. Emotions play no role there. They're too messy and complicated. He leaned on his elbows, staring into my eyes. But they're good in other situations, I suppose. For instance, I've not yet figured out the formula for love or romance. Perhaps I shall learn one day soon. I gasped. Why would you talk this indecently if my uncle were present? Would you talk this indecently if my uncle were present? Ah, there you are, he said, picking up a journal and ignoring my last question. I lifted my chair from the ground before reading through my uncle's notes again, or pretended to at least. I stared at Thomas until my eyes crossed, trying to force some clue to rise to the surface about him or his family. The only thing I could deduce was that he was unabashedly bold, his comments bordering on impropriety. Without lifting his head from his own journal, he said, "Not having any luck figuring me out, then? Don't worry. You'll get better with practice. And yes," he grinned wickedly, eyes fixed on his paper, "you'll still fancy me tomorrow no matter how much you wish otherwise. I'm unpredictable, and you adore it, just as I cannot wrap my massive brain around the equation of you and yet adore it." Every retort I was thinking fell from my thoughts. As if sensing the shift in the room, he glanced up. If I expected Thomas to feel ashamed by his forwardness, I'd be cursedly wrong again. Brow quirked, his look held a dare. I wasn't the sort of girl who backed down, so I kept my gaze locked on his, issuing my own challenge. Two could play his game of flirtation. "Are you quite through being a detective, then?" he finally asked, pointing to a passage in Uncle's journal dated nearly 4 months prior to the first murder. "I think I've found something of great note." My skin prickled with our proximity, but I refused to move away as I leaned over and read. The victim, Emma Elizabeth Smith, was assaulted by two or possibly three attackers, according to her own testimony in the early morning hours of 3 April 1888. The either didn't see... Okay. The either didn't see, or the either, no, it's either. It's weird. It doesn't say they, it just says the either. Okay. The either didn't see, or, as authorities believed, purposefully refused to identify the perpetrator or perpetrators responsible for the horrific act committed on her person. An object rammed inside her... Oh, okay. An object rammed inside her lady proved to be the cause of death one day later, as it upturned her perineum. I'm sorry for the hesitation and the crazy reading, but it's very, I hope you can see, very scrawly, scripty, cursive-y writing. So it's, it's a little hard for me to read, must admit. But, an object rammed inside her lady. Oh, body. Rammed inside her body. Okay, that makes more sense. I can read that now, but it looks like an A and an L, not a B and an O. Oh, okay. An object rammed inside her body proved to be the cause of death one day later as it upturned her perineum. I think there was must have been a picture in the beginning of this somewhere to give me that, because it usually gives you crazy pictures. Where's the pictures? Is there a picture? Come on. That's what it was. So it's near the heart. So it's up near the heart or something. Okay. Whatever that is, Pertur- Peritoneum. Peritoneum. I'll have to look that up later. Sorry for the long pause, guys. Moving on. Hopefully that was whatever. Okay. I swallowed bitter bile down as quickly as it rose in my throat. The 3rd of April was my mother's birthday. How horrid something so despicable could happen on such a joyous day. Oh, we're about to get... Okay. A peritoneum, if memory served me correctly, was the abdominal wall. I had no idea why Thomas thought it was related, when clearly this was an act committed by some other savage wandering the London streets. This murder occurred in April, and our leather apron had only just begun his rampage in August. Before I gave him a proper tongue-lashing, he pointed to the most monstrous part of all. Yes, I found that rather disturbing the first time around, Cresswell. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's her. Yes, I found that rather disturbing the first time around, Cresswell. No need to revisit the horror again unless you're deriving sick pleasure from watching me nearly vomit. I couldn't stop the venom from injecting itself in my tone. Take your emotions out of the equation, Wadsworth. Having a heart that gets digested by such frivolous things won't aid you in this investigation, Thomas said softly, reaching across the short distance separating us, as if he longed to touch my hands and remembered his place. Look at it as if it were simply a puzzle piece with a very unique, albeit gruesome, shape. I wanted to argue that emotions were not frivolous things, but my interest was piqued by his detachment during investigations. If his method worked, it might be a useful switch to flip on and off in myself when needed. I read the journal again. This time, my focus snagging on the repugnant details in a clear manner. Thomas might be mad, but he was a mad genius. On the surface, this crime didn't resemble either Miss Nichols or Miss Chapman. The timeline didn't fit. The woman was still alive when discovered. No organs had been removed, and she was not a brunette. It did, however, fit with our theory of a man driven by his desire to rid the East End of sin. She was nothing but a lowly disease-spreading prostitute, and she did not deserve to live. Had I not already turned myself into an immovable block of ice, I was certain chills would be raking their talons down my spine. The detective inspectors were wrong. Miss Nichols wasn't our murder's first victim. Miss Emma Elizabeth Smith was. Okay, Chapter 7. A Study in Secrets. Wadsworth's Residence, Belgrave Square, 10 September 1888. I pushed the herbed potatoes around my plate until they formed a question mark in my gravy. 2 days had passed since my father had been escorted to the country, and Thomas and I had discovered our murderer's actual first victim. Not much progress was made in the interim. Now the space at night, formerly haunted by the ghosts of things I couldn't control, was filled with questions I couldn't answer. I swear I ate them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. When I thought I'd had my fill, an entire new course, brimming with more questions, was served on a silver platter. Nathaniel watched me over the rim of his wine-glass, his expression a mixture of worry and annoyance. Our aunt and cousin were arriving within a week, so I needed to get myself together by then. I hadn't made for an amusing housemate, and my brother's patience was quickly evaporating. Uncle swore me to secrecy. Even if I wanted to share my thoughts with Nathaniel, I couldn't. Not to mention, the subject matter was hardly appropriate for the dinner table. Discussing missing ovaries, then asking him to pass the salt would be revolting for anyone, let alone a girl of my station. I took a small bite, forcing the food down as best I could. Martha did an exceptional job making roast turkey, braised carrots, and rosemary herbed potatoes, but the aromatic scent and congealing dark brown gravy was turning my stomach. Giving up all pretense of eating the vegetables, I pushed my turkey around the crisp white plate instead. Nathaniel slammed his glass down, rattling my own with the force. That's quite enough. You haven't eaten but a few bites in the last 2 days. I'll not allow you to continue assisting the madman if this is the result. I stared at him, fork poised over my uneaten dinner. We both knew it was an empty threat. Nathaniel broke away from our locked gaze first, rubbing circles in his temples. His suit was exceedingly fashionable this evening, made of imported fabrics and tailored to his frame perfectly. He called for a servant to bring in a bottle of his favorite wine, crafted in a year not even Father was alive in. I could tell by the way his shoulders slumped slightly forward, as if they were growing weary from carrying a heavy load that Father's ill health was weighing on him. He'd always been the more sensitive and kind one, setting every bug that found its way into our house free, feeding each stray that ended up on our doorstep more food than it needed, while I imagined what the insides of the animal would look like should it expire. He saw a butterfly as an object of beauty, deserving to flutter about the world, sharing its multitoned splendor. I saw the shiny metal needle I longed to slide into its body, pinning it to a board for further scientific inspection. He took after our mother. "I cannot have you starve, sister." Nathaniel pushed his own plate forward, pouring himself another glass of wine from the freshly filled crystal decanter set before him. I watched, fascinated, as little spots of red splashed onto the white tablecloth like blood spattering on the walls near the victims' heads. I closed my eyes. Everywhere I looked, there was some reminder of the atrocious acts being committed in Whitechapel. Perhaps I was too preoccupied with death. I sincerely doubted my cousin Liza would think of blood spatter. She'd probably bid an attendant to come and address the stain before it had time to set. Aunt Amelia had raised her well and was undoubtedly hoping I'd turn out the same with a little polishing. Nathaniel took a long pull from his drink and then set it down gently. His fingers tapped a slow beat against the stem of the glass while he came up with another tactic to dissuade me from my studies. This deliberate show of parental guidance was growing tedious. Like a white flag, I held up my hand and waved it. Too tired to argue when he got this way. If keeping myself away from Uncle's laboratory for a few days would appease my brother, then so be it. I didn't need to conduct my research from there. But he didn't know that. "You're right, dear brother. Some time away from all this unpleasantness is precisely what the doctor ordered." I offered him my most sincere smile, pleased to see him slowly return it with one of his own. "I promise I shall have a snack before bed later." I placed my napkin on the table and stood. "If you don't mind, I think I'll retire for a bit. I'm exhausted." Nathaniel rose and tipped his head forward. In his mind, as long as I was eating and sleeping regularly, I was bound to feel right as the sunshine on a summer's day. I'm very pleased you're listening to your big brother for once. A little time and distance from all that misery in the world will do you good, Audrey Rose. "I'm sure you're right." I gave him one more smile before heading before leaving the room. Oh. Okay. We'll pause there. We just finished reading page 71, and we're at the top of 72. We will continue, but we get to open a new gift, a new surprise, because it says end of page 71. So, let's see what we have. Let's see if we can figure out where it came from page 71. So we set that down for a second. Oops. Okay. Here is the item. Look at it here. It says open at the end of page 71. With a cute little smiley face. So let's do it. It doesn't look like it'll be something I'll be able to wear in the upcoming videos. Oh dear. This is kind of opening in a very strange way. Ooh. So I'll say gift opening is happening at 32 minutes and we'll say 40 seconds. So 32, 40. Gift opening. In case anybody wants to skip onto it. And I forgot when I actually started reading. I'll have to look into that. I think it was a kind of a few minutes in, so I apologize. I'll have to look into that. I love my parents' attention to detail. They're using like this type of paper because of like the times. You know, they didn't really have all that. Oh. Huh. Wow. This is really awesome. It's a rose, a stuffed like rose with chocolate candy roses. Oh, but I wonder why. What did we read? Let me go back and see. I love it. And I'm gonna love eating the chocolate. Do you guys happen to know what I was reading that would call for this. I love it. Let me see. Okay, let's look through. On page 71. I mean, her name is Audrey Rose, but let's see. What else was there? Okay, let's see. I close my eyes. Blood spatter. I guess Audrey Rose. A rose for Rose. That makes sense, because the only thing on here about that was about Audrey Rose. I'm looking at the other page, unless maybe they got the page number wrong, but no, isn't that cute? That makes so much sense, because I'm, like, all these items that I've gotten so far are kind of, like, about her, so this is for her name. A rose for Audrey Rose. Oh, I love it. I love it, love it, love it. They're so amazing. I love my family so much. Okay, sorry for that little delay, but there we go. We will continue where we left off, and we will finish up this chapter. Okay, we're almost done with it. The servants closed the wooden doors behind me, securing my brother and themselves on the other side. I took a few breaths, then glanced down the darkened hallway. There was another reason for my early departure from dinner. Father kept records of all our servants, and I was hoping to discover something awful regarding Miss Mary Ann Nichols. I crept toward Father's study, carefully avoiding every spot in the floor that creaked. I didn't want Nathaniel or any of the other servants knowing about this. Pausing at the door, I stared at the ornate handle. Father would murder me should he ever find out I'd sneaked into his private workspace. While it had never been expressly stated, it was a known fact Father's rooms were all off-limits after Mother's death. I was like an unwelcome shadow lurking around corners in my own home. A clanking din rose from the back staircase. A clanking din rose from the back staircase, where most of the servants were below cleaning up from supper. Now was the ideal time to sneak into the study undetected. My palms itched with the need to turn the brass handle and slip inside, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What if he could tell I'd been in there? I doubted he'd come up with anything elaborate, but perhaps he'd set some sort of tripwire up to sound an alarm. I leaned against the wall, nearly giggling. How absurd! To think Father would do such a thing, especially when maids would be in and out cleaning. I was being a foolish child, terrified of unknown things hidden and hiding beneath the bed frame. Taking a deep breath, I steadied my heart. I hadn't realized how it had accelerated its beat in the last few moments. Surely if I could wander the streets at night while a murderer was on the prowl, I could sneak into my own father's study while he was away. Voices sounded from the kitchen, growing louder. They must be bringing up a decadent dessert course for Nathaniel. My pulse galloped through my veins. It was now or never. As the voices came closer, I shot across the hall, turned the knob, and slipped inside, closing the door with a slight click that sounded much too like a bullet sliding into its chamber for my comfort. I stood with my back pressed firmly against the wooden door while the sound of footsteps echoed, then disappeared down the corridor. For added measure, I turned the key, locking myself in and everyone else out. The room was exceptionally dark. I blinked until I was acclimated to the blackness covering everything like spilled ink. Father had had the deep green drapery pulled shut, keeping both the cool September chill and evening light out. The result was a room as welcoming as a crypt. Even Uncle's laboratory with its cadavers had more warmth between its walls. I rubbed the coldness from my arms while slowly making my way toward the fireplace, my silk skirts rustling treacherous whispers behind me. The smell of sandalwood and cigars evoked the ghost of my father, and I couldn't stop myself from continually checking over my shoulder to be certain he wasn't standing behind me, waiting to pounce. I swear eyes watched me from the shadows. A few tapers and hurricane lamps dripped waxy tears, and a giant candelabra decorated the mantel next to a photograph of my mother. We had very few images of her, and each one was a treasure I held dear to my heart. I studied the graceful curve of her lips, tilted into the sweetest smile. It was like peering into a looking-glass showing me in the future. Even our expressions were similar. A heart-shaped locket with tiny gears was clasped in her hands, and on her finger was the very ring I never took off. Tearing my gaze away, I returned to my purpose. All I needed was to light one of the lamps so I could go through Father's records. I hoped no one would notice the slight flicker coming from under the door. As I picked up the base of the hurricane lamp, an object clanked to the floor. Every muscle in my body froze. I waited a few beats, certain I'd be discovered by someone, anyone, but the solemn sound of silence echoed back at me, forcing myself into action. I lit the lamp. The hiss of the flames sparking to life had me holding my breath a second time. Every little sound seemed like a cannon going off, announcing my whereabouts. Finally, I bent and retrieved a small brass key. How odd. Not wanting to waste precious moments figuring out what it opened, I quickly replaced the key and grabbed the lamp again. I held the light up, my eyes trailing over every object in the room, as if it were the first and last time I'd ever see them. I longed to catalog each piece within the shelves of my mind and visit them whenever I'd like. A large portrait, presumably of one of our ancestors, was mounted on the wall between floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. His chest was puffed up with self-importance, and his foot rested atop the carcass of an enormous bear he'd slain. Strange it hadn't been there the last time I was here, though it had been quite a while. How charming, I whispered to myself. An ocean of blood surrounded the furry corpse island he was standing upon. The artist captured a deranged essence in our ancestors' eyes that chilled the very marrow in my bones. I scanned the room again. Everything was dark. The wood, the rug, the large settee. A few spots of brocade wallpaper visible from behind artifacts collected over several lifetimes. Even the marble making up the fireplace was a deep green with darker veining. No wonder Father couldn't move past his grief. Darkness was his constant companion. I walked over to his desk, a mammoth thing taking up most of the room, threatening me with its hulking form. I rolled my eyes. Leave it to me to give an ordinary desk that much of a villainous personality. Hulking form indeed. Sitting in Father's plush leather chair, I set the lamp down, taking great care not to disturb any of the papers scattered about. I couldn't help noticing Father had made quite a few mechanical sketches. The detail he managed to capture using only charcoal and paper was astounding. I swear I almost heard the cranking of gears and smelled the oil greasing their parts. There was beautiful destruction all across the page. Flying ships with guns bolstered to their sides and other miniature wartime toys took up each inch of paper. Shame he stopped creating clockwork pieces. Judging from the images I saw, he hadn't lost his talent. I stopped ruminating and slid open each drawer of the desk, searching with renewed purpose for files he kept on all our servants, both past and present. Even though our butler tended to the records, as was customary, Father was quite insistent he have his own. When I reached the bottom drawer, I discovered it was locked. I leaned closer. It looked as if Father had created the locking mechanism himself. Where would I hide something important? I tapped my fingers on the arms of the chair. Then I remembered the key that had fallen from beneath the lamp. Running to the mantel, I obtained it, then quickly ran back to his desk. Time was ticking away, and dessert was nearly over, and servants would be busy in and out of the hall shortly. It was a long shot the key would work, but I had to try. I shifted the light closer. With shaking hands, I slowly pushed the key into place. I turned it to the left, certain it would have opened already if it were the correct one. When a small clink sounded and the drawer cracked open. Thank the heavens! Opening the drawer fully, I ran my fingers over the tops of files, which were smashed together. There were so many I feared it'd take all evening to locate what I needed. I couldn't even recall how many maids we'd gone through over the last 5 years. Luckily, Father organized this drawer better than the top of his desk. Little name tags peeked out above the folders like islands breaking through an ocean of ink on paper. I thumbed through them once, then twice before finding Miss Mary Ann Nicole's father. Checking over my shoulder to be sure the door was still locked, I pulled the file out and quickly read a lot of nothing. There was only a ledger with her payments. No background reference, no letter of recommendation, not a single glimpse into her life prior to working for us. I couldn't believe Uncle had recognized her so easily. According to Father's records, she'd been in our employ for only a fortnight. I slumped into the chair, shaking my head. I removed a random file, drawing my brows together. This was for our cook, Martha, also our longest servant, as she didn't interact with us often and Father loved her black pudding. It contained a letter of reference from her previous employer, a letter from Scotland Yard stating she'd never been under investigation, her monthly wages, allowances, and board wages, and a photograph of her in her typical cook's attire. I scanned a few more files, finding they all resembled our cook's. On a hunch, I dug around in the drawer until I found another servant who'd been dismissed for no better reason than having stayed with our family more than a month. Her file looked precisely like Miss Nicholas's. Confirming my suspicion that Father must clean out the majority of their information once they were no longer employed, I closed the folders, taking pains to place everything back exactly where I'd found it. Cursing my father for keeping pointless records, I wished I could set the whole mess of papers ablaze. As I slid the last file into place, a familiar name caught my attention. I hesitated briefly before removing the folder and flipping it open. It contained a lone newspaper clipping. A brutal coldness enveloped me where I sat. Why did Father have an article on Miss Emma Elizabeth Smith's murder? And that's the end of that chapter. Okay, so that's it for Chapter 7. We will pick back up on Chapter 8 in the next video of this book of the readings. And the next secret little gift is on page 109. So let's see, how far? So we're on page 79 to 109. We should be able to get to it in the next video. It is pretty far, but we should be able to. Okay, so I hope you're enjoying this. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell to get those continued videos. And leave me a comment below if you like this. I most likely will probably not wear everything in each video. Let me know how you feel about that, if you're okay with that. But I did want to do it this time, just, so we could definitely get the reminder of kind of where we were and things. So yeah. Hit that thumbs up button also. Let me know what you think. I hope you're excited. Hopefully I didn't make too many mistakes. Sorry for all the mistakes I did make. But that's it. So without further ado, that's it for Reading by Ree for this channel. And we'll pick back up in the next video. Alright, thank you. Bye.